So he's well on the way to a complete and total recovery. In the meantime, today we're really excited because on Monday the official announcement came out that Scott Walker is, in fact, for the quite telegraph this. People announce.
Thank you for your attention.
So joining us now is Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker, welcome to the Glenn Beck program with Pat and Stu. Hi.
Hey, great to be with you guys. Yeah, Stu, what do you think? I'd walk out on the stage and just drop the mic and say,
Now that would have been funny. Yes. And then come back out and pick it up and say, okay, just kidding.
Right, just kidding.
Well, you're a welcome addition to the race, Scott, and you know you've done. We've talked about your record before as far as Wisconsin goes. Our audience really sees you as one of the top contenders as we go into this. Was there anything?
Well, thanks. I mean,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was just saying it's one of those interesting things is that there's a lot of great people, including a number of good friends of mine out there. Mm-hmm. People ask, well, why would you run if there's other people you know and admire and like out there? And I said, well, there's really two groups. There's people who are good fighters but have largely not won those fights. There are other people who are good winners who've largely not taken on those fights. I think what we bring that's unique to this race is we've done both. We have fought and we've won. Not just elections, although we've won 3 elections in 4 years in a blue state, but we've won conservative battles over and over and over again. Yeah. And I think that's what people are hungry for, not just in our party or our movement. I think Americans are hungry for that.
This is an amazing year because there's been a lot of years where we've looked at the field and thought, geez, there's nobody. Okay, maybe I can hold my nose and vote for this guy. Or, you know, if push comes to shove, maybe I can vote for that guy. This time, though, there's 17 people that are going to be in this race, or 18 or 36 or whatever it is. And, I mean, like you said, there's some good people in this. Ted Cruz we really like a lot. We like Rand Paul. Bobby Jindal's a good guy. You probably know him well as a fellow governor. And then you come into this race. So tell us what differentiates yourself and your policies from the rest of the field.
Well, I really think, I think there's a hunger out there. I talk to people all over the country. I was in South Carolina today, was in Nevada yesterday, I would be in New Hampshire tomorrow, and over the weekend in Iowa. And no matter where I go, there's Republican conservative activists who are frustrated because we have a Republican House, we just got a Republican Senate. They want people to lead in Washington. And it's one thing to fight. A lot of good people, some of the folks you mentioned, agree with them, a lot of issues out there, but they have yet to win those fights. And then there are others who've been really good at, winning elections, but they haven't taken on the kind of fights. I said, if somebody wants proof, not just talk, if they want proof that if I elect this person president, they're going to follow through on the common sense conservative reforms they're talking about. I think there's no one in America who's been better tested over the last 4 years than we have. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
We not only took on the unions and won, we have right to work, we did prevailing wage reform, we cut taxes by $2 billion, we defunded Planned Parenthood and passed pro-life legislation, we passed castle doctrine, concealed carry. Heck, my state now has a requirement to have a photo ID to vote. Who would have thought that in a blue state like Wisconsin? But yet we showed that common sense conservative reforms can win, and if they can win in a blue state like Wisconsin, I believe we can make them work in America.
You brought up having a majority in the House and the Senate for Republicans. What is the point of that? If you can't do something about this Planned Parenthood video that just came out just yesterday, where you have them on tape allegedly saying that they were essentially selling these baby parts. They're denying part of that. They're not seemingly denying the fact that they're skirting federal partial birth abortion law. I mean, they pretty much straight out admit that's going on in the video. What can be done about Planned Parenthood?
Well, I think they need to crack down. You look in the states, and I've done it, others have done it as well. The states, we've been aggressive in defunding them, which they've screamed about, ran millions of dollars, and they and their supporters ran millions of dollars in tax ads. At the federal level, not only is this the right thing, it's just fundamentally the right thing to do to crack down on this. So it's the right policy, but also politically, strategically, I think it makes a lot of sense. Put that legislation on the president's desk, make him veto it, and then make some of these, particularly some of these Democrats who live in represent somewhat vulnerable areas for them politically, make them explain. I think it's not just people like me who are pro-life, but I think most Americans look at that and say, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
And this is one of those where we've got to get an offense instead of being on defense. The same way we need to put a bill on the president's desk that gets rid of Obamacare once and for all, that takes on one issue after another to show Americans This is what you get if you have a Republican House, Republican Senate, and you have a reform-minded Republican as president. These are the kind of positive things from tax reform to education reform to legal reform. You name it, we can do it in America, but the sooner we can show it, the more people have confidence. Because most independents, I believe, aren't independents because they're moderates. They're independents because they're tired of being burned by candidates who promise one thing and then fail to deliver it in the election. It's why we carried our base more than just about any governor in America, and yet won independents in my state by 11, almost 12 points, because they want someone to lead.
Governor, you if you were to win the presidency, you inherit. I mean, this guy talks about what a mess he inherited from the last guy. I mean, you look at the things that have to be unraveled that have gotten America enmeshed in such socialism and such wrong-headed policies. First of all, I mean, you've got Obamacare, which you have to deal with. And is your policy to repeal Obamacare? Is it repeal and replace?
Repeal it entirely. You got to put patients and families back in charge. And I believe I was asked out at the Western Conservative Summit, would I support going to the so-called nuclear option in the Senate? I said absolutely. We can't let rules that aren't in the Constitution let the minority on an issue particularly as important as this. When you've got checks and balances between the House and the Senate, between the branches, we need to have an all-out attack to repeal Obamacare and put patients and families back in charge. We need to, day one, pull back on this outrageous, we need to terminate this outrageous deal with Iran and put in place crippling economic sanctions against that country, which is the leading state sponsor of terrorism, and convince our allies to do the same. We need to get rid of this action the president's taken on illegal immigration, which is completely wrong, and why I joined the federal lawsuit, but we shouldn't need a federal lawsuit to do that. We need to get rid of things like Dodd-Frank and other bad regulations out there. We need to do that right away, just like we did 4 years ago, where we took on the big reforms right away.
Talking to Governor Scott Walker. Governor, obviously, as a governor, you have executive-level experience, which is something obviously beneficial when you're going to run a country. But the other side of that is you're not necessarily dabbled in, or at least are heavily involved in foreign policy, and that's something that you're going to get hit on at least. You had this Iran thing that comes down yesterday. The sanctions were working against Iran, which is why they're at the table, I suppose. But now that this deal is supposedly in place, what can you do to unwind it? And is there any teeth in that sort of movement?
Sure. Well, two parts. First, I should point out for anyone who doubts, in my lifetime, at least I would argue, the best president on foreign policy and national security was a governor from California. So I think it's important to remember it's all about leadership. I mean, here's a guy who helped us rebuild the military. He stood up for our allies. He stood up to our enemies. He stood for American values without apology. That led to one of the most peaceful times in modern American history. The bottom line is it's not so much about the position as it is about the ability, the capacity to lead. And I think we've shown in the most difficult of circumstances, at the state level we can lead, and we'd apply that at the federal level as well, surrounding us with a great cabinet, listening to our military leaders. But when it comes to Iran, I really do believe that we can terminate that deal. The only good part about this is because the president doesn't have the courage to take it to Congress, particularly to ratify by the Senate. The next president's not bound by it. So as president, literally on my first day, I would terminate this deal, and I would put back in place the sanctions, even greater, I would argue, crippling sanctions, economic sanctions against Iran. And I believe if we lead again, unlike the Obama-Clinton doctrine of leading from behind, if we lead again, I believe major numbers of our allies would follow suit.
How do you get the allies, though, back on board? How do you get everybody else who was involved in these sanctions back on board with it? How do you get the Russians
getting
back to the
billions and billions of dollars in arms sales? I mean, they're not
just do it unilaterally at that point, Governor?
Oh, it's not. I would acknowledge it is not easy. I've looked at this for some time. It's not easy in many ways. It's kind of like the putting a genie back into a bottle. But you're not going to get. It'll be tough with places like Russia and China, although I don't consider either of them allies. But for the United Kingdom, for certainly, I mean, think about it. Who would have thought that France would be to the right of us on this issue? But that's because of what happened, earlier this past year, and how that shook their way of life there, and they saw firsthand what happens if you don't deal with elements of radical Islamic terrorism. Which, by the way, the president earlier this year proclaimed that the greatest challenge the future generations with climate change. Well, I just say respectfully, Mr. President, I disagree. The greatest challenge to future generations is radical Islamic terrorism, and that's not just ISIS. Iran is a part of that problem. They're the chief state sponsor of terrorism in the world, particularly in that region, whether it's with Hezbollah, whether it's with Hamas, certainly what they're doing with Syria and connected to Assad there, what they're doing with the Houthis in Yemen, what they're doing even with the Shiite-based militias in parts of Iraq. These are bad actors who have not changed back from the days when they held 52 American hostages for 444 days. We should not be doing business with them.
The foundational issue with all of this stuff is that we put a lot of the wrong people in control over a long period of time. And part of that goes back to our education system. Governor, that our audience is very passionate about Common Core. They do not like it at all. Can you tell us what the status is in Wisconsin about Common Core, and how do you see this developing going forward?
Yeah, we passed the budget. I included language that removes any requirement for the state, that the state has on local school districts. So they're no longer bound by Common Core. That's completely out. It was put in place before I was governor. We finally got the legislature to approve that as part of the budget I proposed. And we got rid of the funding for the so-called Smarter Balance test. But I think even more importantly, not just what I'm doing in the state, others are trying to do in Washington, even though it clearly is not a federal law. That's what proponents say. Well, it's not a federal law, but it has become a federal policy in a part because of the Department of Education interweaving that into their funding issues for the states and for schools across the country. It's yet one more reason why I believe this country would be better off if we took money and power out of Washington, particularly when it comes to education, and sent it back not just to our states but our schools, where local decisions are better made by local parents, taxpayers, teachers, families, instead of the bureaucracies in our nation's capital. It's much more effective, much more efficient, and definitely more accountable. No Common Core, no nationwide school board. Okay,
and finally, probably the hottest topic going right now, especially with the sanctuary city situation and the tragic death of that young woman in San Francisco. And I imagine in Wisconsin, I'll bet Madison and Milwaukee are probably both sanctuary cities, which you don't have control over, obviously. But what do you do about the out-of-control illegal immigration situation? I mean, I would suspect that the first thing is we secure the border, but then what do you do with the sanctuary city policies that are nationwide, with the illegal aliens that are estimated anywhere from 11 to 30 million here? What do you do about that?
Yeah, well, it's specific to sanctuary cities. You got to enforce the law, and I've said that overall about immigration, but particularly when it comes to these sanctuary cities. And if they're dealing with someone, particularly violent criminal, I mean, these cases where we've had these tragic occurrences have typically involved situations where someone's been in and out of the criminal justice system. They're not assisting. I think there's huge problems with that. But even before you get to those specific examples, I do believe you secure the border. I took Governor Abbott up on his request earlier this year, and I went to the border, not only up in the air and on the ground, but saw the videos, spoke to not only federal officials, but state, local officials. And it is, I knew there was a problem, but it was so eye-opening. I've talked to others in Arizona and other states as well about this. It is so eye-opening because what you have international criminal organizations penetrating our land-based borders in a way that if it was happening on our coast, on the east or west coast, we'd be sending in the Coast Guard, if not the Navy, out here. And so it's people trying to bring over drugs, they're bringing over firearms, they're bringing over people, not just people to work, they're bringing over people to traffic. And so we've got to deal with that issue. People say, oh, you can't secure the border. That's nonsense. We can do it both through infrastructure, but also through technology and personnel. I was, earlier this year, I looked at the fence that they built and staff and monitor in Israel. And after they were effective, it's like about 500 miles. So for a small country, that's a lot of fencing.
Yeah.
They saw something like a more than 90% reduction in terrorist-related activities by having a secure fence there. We've got a border that's 4 times that, but we're a lot bigger country, and we have plenty more assets. We should be able to secure the border, along with that, enforce the law. No amnesty. Citizenship should have a high standard. And then when people want to talk about legal immigration, my priority is this. We should be looking out for America's working families and their wages in a way that will continue to improve the American economy.
Okay. Governor Scott Walker.
Sing it to me. Too bad there's not a place people could go and help your campaign if If only there were something they could do that this
Like
spoke to them.
Skywalker.com.
Oh my gosh!
He thought of that.
Gosh.
Right.
That is an amazing coincidence. There is a place.
Governor, we only have time for a one-word answer. You're going to go see Brett Favre retire?
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to the big event on Thanksgiving. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Governor Scott Walker from
Thanks a lot.
Wisconsin in the
Appreciate it,
race.
Governor.
ScottWalker.com. There you go.
ScottWalker.com.
All right. Sponsor this half hour is Casper Mattress. This is it's a game